And now I happily announce our next speaker, who is going to be talking about measuring performance, quantifying the work of a Scrum Master. Please welcome Stephanie Gasche.
Just a second, sorry. Ta-da, perfect, working. All right, thank you for being here. This is a bit of a, let's say, a more specific topic than the more general topics that we've had so far on leadership, but in more general talks. So I'll be talking about measuring performance of Scrum Masters. Just to get a brief, let's say, understanding of who's in the audience, how many of you are actually working as Scrum Masters? Raise your hand. Okay, as far as I can see against the lights, a few. How many of you are managers or leaders of Scrum Masters? Raise your hand. Okay, more people. How many of you are actually somehow working with Scrum Masters as team members or as, I don't know, colleagues, whatever? Okay. How many of you do not know what a Scrum Master is? Okay, there's still a few at least. Okay, that's fine. Okay, I'll get into what a Scrum Master is in a second, so we'll have a look at that. Firstly, go back. Okay, who am I? So my name is Steffi Gasche. I'm from next door, a country called Austria, a city called Vienna, and I kind of, what's my history? I kind of slid into the whole, let's say, Agile scene in 2012. Started off as an interim Scrum Master, Scrum consultant, management consultant, helping Agile transitions. Then I kind of changed on a purpose-driven, let's say, experiment. I went into I don't want to say politics, but government near, or like close to government job. Worked with refugees, started my own social impact startups, and now returned back to the Agile world as it's a very, let's say, welcoming and people-based world and environment. So that's who I am. If you have any questions on my other things, ask me in the break. Generally, my interest has been Scrum Masters and working with teams for a very, very long time, so that's why I'm talking about this today. But why exactly this topic, talking about performance and the performance of a Scrum Master? How many of you are actually somehow involved in Agile transitions? Like the company going more Agile? Okay, that's a lot of people. Okay. I don't know about you, but from what I can see, let's say from the Agile coaching perspective, as I'm working as an Agile coach for the past few years, going from company to company, I can see that there's a lot of discussion about, or actually not discussion, it's a firm statement saying, well, okay, you've got this Agile transition, meaning you want your company to turn more Agile, to become more Agile, being, in the IT department, being business agility, doesn't matter. If you want Scrum teams, you have to have Scrum Masters. So there's always got to be one Scrum Master per Scrum team. This is something we all agree on, right? Yes? I mean, Sean, you had the whole audience thing going. Come on. Yes, we agree on this? Yeah, okay, good. Okay, but the one thing that I haven't really heard, and this is across all companies I've worked with, is this is the impact that we're expecting from a Scrum Master. Everyone talks about Scrum Masters, but nobody's, or at least I haven't met many, talking about what do we expect from putting somebody into this role. So this, for some reason, is not being talked about. And that's exactly why I want to talk about this today. But before I go into it, and I've got a few, let's say, answers, not the perfect ones, otherwise I'd be rich and famous, but I've got a few answers. Before I go into it, could you please turn to the person next to you that you have not spoken to today? So if you're, from a larger company, don't talk to your typical colleague. Talk to someone you haven't talked to yet, and ask. So introduce yourself first, of course, and then ask this person. Come on. Don't talk to them. So ask them, what do you expect from a great Scrum Master? And if you don't want to talk about Scrum Masters, because Scrum Masters might not be the thing that you're working with or the role that you're working with, talk about team coaches. What do you expect from a team coach? What do you expect from a Scrum Master? How would you notice the impact that they're having? So I'll give you 2 minutes. Talk to your neighbor about this question. What do you expect from a Scrum Master? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Does anyone know the signal of the hand and everyone being quiet? Okay, thank you very much. Do we have any volunteers to share their discussion, what they've come up with? It's really difficult to see. Thank you.
We've been discussing 2 things. One is about the ceremonies and stuff like that. But in order to have effective ceremonies, we need a team. So we nominated as a number 1 impact that form a team from a group of individuals.
So what you expect from a Scrum Master is to be able to form a team out of a group of individuals. Thank you. One more. Can't see. I'm just going to pick someone at random if I can't see anyone. Anyone? Yes. Sorry? So to raise the efficiency of the team? Okay. How would you measure that? I'll go into that. So yes, I absolutely agree with you. But the question, as I just asked you, how would you measure that? Because I think we all kind of understand what a Scrum Master is there for, but how do we really know whether the Scrum Master is the right person or like in the right role, right? So I don't know about you guys who have just raised their hand when I asked who's doing an agile transition at the moment. From what I've been observing in pretty much most companies that I've worked for, is that whenever we're talking about, Scrum Masters and who would be up for it, for some reason there's quite a bit of a misunderstanding about the Scrum Master role. What I'm seeing a lot of the time is not who would be a great Scrum Master, because the Scrum Master is really important for an agile transition if we are working with Scrum. It's more of who have we got left over? Which roles are we eliminating? And thus we need to put this person into this new role that we've never heard of before, right? And I'm talking about project managers, I'm talking about, well, it's usually project managers actually. And I feel sorry for them because it's not fair, it's a different role. And so let's think about whether they're the right people. Some of them are, some of them are not, and that's okay. The second thing I've been observing is that actually if there are really good Scrum Masters, they get really frustrated after a while. So if we're talking a few months, a few years maybe even in a Scrum Master role, people get really frustrated. Why? Several reasons. Firstly, because we're always thinking in impediments, we're always thinking in improvements, right? So if we're continuously looking at what can we improve, what is an impediment, what is hindering my team to get better, we're continuously in this, like, let's say, negative spiral, or in this improvement spiral. We're never really happy with what we've got right now. That's the one reason. And the second, and if you don't think about it yourself, if you're not aware of it, you might get really frustrated after a while because things aren't improving as much as you hope. And secondly, it's because there's a lot of, let's say, organizational obstacles, which are very difficult to change as one person. And the third thing that I've been observing is whenever I'm talking about metrics and like, how do we measure this? Then people are really frustrated because they're like, oh, no. KPIs, no, we don't talk about that. Okay, OKRs is the new thing. But generally, measuring things and looking at metrics, looking at KPIs, it's really a negative thing. It's okay. All right. I don't know why, but that's fine. Well, I have a few guesses, but that's okay. Let's have a look at what is a Scrum Master actually. Let's just have a common understanding for this role in this room. Generally, the Scrum Guide and we as Agilists have one, let's say, definition. And we all agree that the Scrum Master is the one role that ensures the productivity of the team, of the Scrum team, meaning the development team plus the product owner plus him or herself. And actually ensures the productivity and tries to raise it. Okay, so those are the two elements. But the focus, the main responsibility of a Scrum Master is the productivity of the Scrum team. Who of you have seen the Ian the Scrum Master movie? Or the short clip? Okay, those of you who haven't, check it out. It's 5 minutes and it's quite hilarious. Ian the Scrum Master. So if we break this down, okay, so we've got to ensure, as a Scrum Master, we've got to ensure the productivity of our Scrum team. What does that mean? If you look at it, it kind of comes down to 3 elements: the Facilitator Aspect, the Servant Leader Aspect, and the Change Agent Aspect. So when we talk about facilitation, I don't know about you guys, but what I've seen a lot of the time is whenever a Scrum Master kind of takes on this role, this is what they focus on the most, which is okay. But it's something to be aware of. Facilitation, I'm not talking about facilitating meetings. This is often mistranslated. I know in German, I don't know about Hungarian, but a lot of the time they translate it into facilitation of meetings. We are talking about much more than that. We're talking about facilitation of the process, of the Scrum process, of the Scrum ceremonies. We're talking about facilitation of learning. Okay? I don't know how many people are actually focusing on this when they're thinking about facilitation. We're talking about servant leader, we're talking about change agent, okay? So these are the 3 aspects of it. And when looking at metrics or KPIs or measuring the performance of a Scrum Master, I was thinking about how can I measure these elements? How can I measure whether somebody is making an impact as a facilitator? How can I measure whether somebody is making an impact as a change agent? How can I measure if somebody is making an impact as a servant leader? Okay, so that's kind of what I want to walk you through now. I've got 5 ideas for metrics for each of these elements. So let's have a look at the metrics that I've got for facilitators, for measuring whether someone's having an impact in this aspect. So the first metric, I don't know how many of you have been in these kinds of meetings. I've seen them, I don't like them. I don't think anyone likes them, actually. So if we're talking about facilitation, the very simplest form, so the facilitation of meetings, facilitation of Scrum ceremonies, let's look at increasing meeting efficiency. How can we measure that? It's kind of simple. Let's look at the average cost of a team member. You kind of know this. Let's look at the minutes that we're saving because somebody is facilitating the meeting in a good way. And this is actually how much money the Scrum Master is saving the organization, right? So we can measure that. Another thing that we could measure is the increase of meeting effectiveness. How do you measure that? Have you heard of roti? Not the Indian bread, but the actual feedback method? No? Nobody? Return on time invested, ROTI. It's what I ask after every single one of my meetings, just to understand, what was the investment like? So if you were here for an hour or for this talk for 40 minutes, how much did you get out of it? What's the return on investment of your time? So ROTI, return on time invested. You can measure that. You can ask your team to give you numbers, the fist of fives, or you could ask for a feedback door or something to actually measure this in comparison to the past meetings. So you can look at the ROTI, or if you want, you can also count the participation of your team members. Simple methods. It's nothing, scientific. Just simple for you as a Scrum Master to measure whether you're making an impact in terms of facilitating meetings. And Scrum teams are all about, being creative, being effective because of different team members, maybe even cross-functional, working together. So keeping a tally would also help. The third metric that I've got for you in terms of facilitation is actually focusing on facilitation of learning. Who of you has heard of the bus factor? Good, a few of you. So the bus factor is a really positive metric. The bus factor is pretty much, so if I've got a team of people and one person, leaves the office and goes home and crosses the street and gets run over by a bus, does the project stop or not? If it was that one vital person, that one expert, you've got a bus factor in your team of 1. Meaning if the right person is run over by a bus, you've got, the project stops. So that's the bus factor of 1. What do you want to do as a Scrum Master? Obviously, you want to increase the bus factor. You want to increase the knowledge that is spread in your team. We're always talking about T-shaped people. That's kind of behind it. So how do we measure the rise in the team's bus factor? Well, you could build a skills matrix. Who works with skills matrix or something similar? Making it explicit what kind of skills are in the team, what kind of skills are necessary in order to build the product or the project. To actually write this down on a matrix, Excel sheet, or honestly, like a piece of paper, flip chart, doesn't matter. And actually have a look at how are we distributing the knowledge, how well is the knowledge distributed amongst the team members and the skills that we need. So you could do that and have a look at how much is it increasing. So talking about, you could do this with color schemes, you could do this with numbers. Generally, it's important to have it explicit how well are we sharing knowledge in our team in order to increase the bus factor. That makes an impact. Metric number 4 in terms of facilitation. Obviously, as a Scrum Master, I should know my Scrum. I should make sure that the team understands what Scrum is all about, what we're trying to achieve. So I could also measure the understanding of Scrum. So what does that mean? How could I do that? Well, I could simply, keep a tally of the amount of times, some of you might know this, the whole, why do we have to do this whole retrospective thing again? Do we really need to do a daily stand-up today? What's the sprint review again? Just keep a tally on this. From within the team and from outside of the team, how many people are asking you, do we really need to do this? What is it about again, et cetera, et cetera. So, and if the tally is decreasing, so if there's fewer people asking you about this, then A, people are giving up on it, and don't want to ask anymore, let the whole Agile train roll them over, or they're starting to understand it, and I'm hoping it's a second. So again, keep a tally on it, and just see how is the understanding in the organization, in the team, increasing in terms of Scrum. And the 5th metric I've got for you in terms of facilitation is actually context switching. So the amount of money that is lost to context switching and how we're reducing that as Scrum Masters. Loss due to context switching, Weinberg, anyone has heard of it? Yeah? Okay, good. So there's been a study saying that the amount of, so if you work on, actually we talked about this in the morning, multitasking, that it actually decreases our effectiveness and our efficiency. And Weinberg did a study saying if you increase the amount of projects that you work on, your lost due to, so the time lost due to context switching increases exponentially. It's incredible. So if you look at this graph, if you work on 2 projects at the same time, 20% of your time already goes into, just context switching. And the more projects you take on, the more time goes into context switching. So, of course, as a Scrum Master, I want to reduce that. Why do I want to reduce that? Well, one of the Scrum values is called focus. So how do I measure that? I can just keep a tally. Really simple. I could just keep a tally on the amount of interruptions that are coming in from outside as well as within the team. You can do simple things as how many times does the phone ring a day with things that are not supposed to be in the sprint? Or how many times does somebody come in every day and asks for something to be done that's not part of the sprint commitment? Just keep a tally on that and make sure to reduce that. So that's something that you could easily measure as well. So these are the 5 metrics that I have for facilitation. Are there any more in the room? Anything that you're doing that I haven't mentioned? Okay, I'm coming to that one. Not yet, in terms of facilitation. Okay, we'll have a look at that. So servant leader. Servant leader, I don't know, but your image in your head, I've got the image of like a kind of a shepherd dog running around like a herd of sheep. This sounds really awful. But you're keeping the team together not by running ahead and telling everyone to come with him, but actually to go around the team and make sure that everyone's got what they need in order to go in a certain direction. And how do I measure the impact that I'm having as a servant leader? Team happiness, individual and team happiness. I want to improve that. Why do I want to improve that? As we heard earlier, people who are happy at work improve, not improve, but they perform better. So how do I measure that? Several ways, and these are just some ways that I'm mentioning. You could keep, again, a tally or some kind of feedback chart on the door, with a little daily happiness rating. Or you can do this on a sprint retrospective rhythm. Or you could use more professional things, like, for example, you can use the Gallup Employee Engagement Survey. You could look at the team 5 dysfunctions of a team check. You could pay for all of this, or you could just do it really simple and put a flip chart on the wall and have people rate while walking out in the evening at 5 o'clock, running to their cars and trying to get home. So you could do that in order to improve team performance. You could also measure the team spirit. What's it like? Unplanned overtime. This is something people often forget. How does it work in Scrum? We give commitments, right? So if we've got a sprint, well, we always work in sprints in Scrum. That's kind of the point of it. So we always commit to what we're going to deliver in the sprint. So we kind of know what's going to happen in the next 2 weeks, right? So if somebody's staying longer in order to finish whatever was committed in the sprint, there's something wrong, right? If people are coming early, others are leaving early, others are leaving late, whichever one, it's not really a team, I think. So it's really easy also to measure the unplanned overtime. How do I do that? I put up a vase, and every time I stay for an hour longer, or a team member stays for an hour longer, I can just put a golf ball or a gummy bear or whatever into this vase, and at the end of the sprint we can have a look at how filled up it is in comparison to a few sprints ago, and talk about this in the retrospective. So this is something I can easily measure. I can also tweak the commitment in terms of, during the sprint planning, work on that, not to overcommit. What else do we want to do? We want to improve predictability. That's one of the reasons why Scrum is introduced in a lot of companies. How do we do that? Well, this is one of the charts that I use with one of my clients. Super simple. We just have a look at the amount of stories or backlog items, doesn't matter what it is, or the amount of story points, again, it doesn't matter. So you just put that up. How much did we commit to in the sprint? And then how much did we actually deliver? After a while, it becomes more predictable. How much can we actually do as a team? How many goals can we achieve? How many story points can we achieve? How many stories can we achieve? So we want to improve on that. Why? Because it's one of the Scrum values. It's commitment. And no, not the last one yet. But I also want to increase the self-reflection of the team. Why? Because one of the, let's say, what I understand as a Scrum Master is that after a while, the Scrum team should be very I love this word, self-organized. They're always self-organized, but they should really be able to cope without me. So as a Scrum Master, I should be able to go on a, 5-month holiday, and the team should be all right without me. That's kind of what I'm aiming to head to. So how do I kind of measure whether we're going to that direction already? Well, I can have a look at, how many improvements or ideas for improvement, or how many impediments, it's the other way. So how many, let's say, obstacles or potential hindrances does the team actually call out by themselves? So how many are coming from me as a Scrum Master? How many are being brought up by the team? If that increases, I can see that my team is starting to have a certain view on things, has a certain, inspect and adapt view. And it's increasing and it's improving, and that's a good thing. I want to improve and increase the self-reflection of my team. And the last metric in terms of servant leadership that I want to give to you is to actually increase the satisfaction for the Scrum Master stakeholders. Now, who are the Scrum Master stakeholders? Ask your Scrum team. It's the #1 stakeholder. Ask your Scrum team, and I know we had Jürgen Appello here in the morning, and he did a thing a few years ago with Management 3.0 called merit money. Has anyone used it? Does anyone have any experience with merit money? No, okay. Well, you could do that with, so merit money is pretty much a concept of where the team distributes, let's say, merit money, so bonus points to each other in terms of how much did you help me in the sprint, or how satisfied am I with your work in the sprint. So kind of not one bonus system that comes from the top, but actually distributing from your team members. And you can do exactly the same thing with the Scrum Master. You can ask the Scrum team, how much money would you be willing to pay for your Scrum Master? So if you could choose as a team, would you actually have a Scrum Master? If yes, how much would you pay them? Because we typically still work with project money or project budget. And then also it's a good question to ask, well, first of all, why? Why would you pay that amount of money, or that little, or that high? And secondly, if you would, for example, if you pay a very little amount of money, then what would you pay, what would you invest in instead? So if it weren't a Scrum Master, what would you invest in instead? It gives a lot of insights into the team's needs. Or, a bit of a, let's say, less extreme way, it's just at the end of the sprint to ask, on a scale from 1 to 10, how supported did you feel by your Scrum Master in the sprint, and why? Again, it's really simple tools, really simple ways of getting feedback, and to actually see the impact that a Scrum Master is having by working with this team. So these are the, so far, 10 metrics for servant leadership and facilitation. Has anyone used any of these so far? Okay. Can't see a hand. All right, let's have a look at the last 5. Because this is a very practical, hands-on session. I want you to really be able to come out of here and use some of these. As a change agent, how can I measure the impact the Scrum Master is having from the perspective of a change agent? Well, we want the Scrum Master to decrease the internal costs. So how can I measure that? Well, let's have a look at how much money is a story point, or a story, or a backlog item, or a goal that we define for the sprint. How much money is that costing us at the moment? And how is that decreasing over time? So meaning, what's the velocity of the team? How much is it raising? How many more story points is the team able to deliver? That's one way. It's, metrics are always going one way or the other. Generally, this one is a very simple one because the Scrum Master doesn't actually estimate, right? So the Scrum Master has no direct impact on this as well. Can't fake it. The next metric is really to reduce the waste in the organization. Reducing waste is one of the big lean principles, also taken up by Agile/Scrum. How much money are we actually saving the organization by reducing certain impediments? Meaning by getting rid of certain hindrances, getting rid of certain blockers. How much money are we saving the organization? Make that transparent. Use elements like cost of delay. How much is it costing our organization if we're not delivering this feature, or if we're not getting rid of this, or if we're not increasing on our test automation, et cetera, et cetera. Reduce waste in the organization. Number 13, we want to increase the decision-making power. Again, one of the reasons is because we want to get rid of ourselves as Scrum Masters. We want the teams to be enabled to deliver productively by themselves and to increasingly inspect and adapt. How do we measure that? We measure that by actually having a look at the amount of impediments that still need to be escalated in order to be solved. Because if I'm a really self-organized team, and if I have the authority as a team to change the organization or to change certain structures, then I don't need to escalate things. I don't need to escalate impediments to the next level of management. So we can, again, keep a tally on that. How many do we need to have? How many impediments do we need to escalate per sprint, per month, generally? Speeding up of the value flow to the customer. And this is let's say, a typical metric that is being used by Agile teams, typically Kanban teams. How do we do that? Well, we want to generally measure and decrease the lead time. So how long does it take from, hey, I've got this idea, to, hey, our customers can actually use it and be happy about it, or report back bugs or whatever. But generally, the value flow through the organization. How much are we decreasing the time it takes from idea to actually the customers or users using it? So we want to actually measure that. And yes, the Scrum Master has a direct impact on that by getting rid of impediments, by changing certain aspects of the organization in order to increase the cycle time, in order to increase the delivery time. And the last metric that I want to give to you tonight, well, tonight, it's actually afternoon, today, is actually the increase in customer value. And this is typically a product owner metric, but since the Scrum Master is also the coach of the product owner, I find it's an important metric as well. And this is, also most companies already measure this in ways of Net Promoter Score. So use that or whatever other metrics you're using as an organization. Or you can also just get stakeholder feedback during your sprint review, because if you're doing Scrum, you've got sprint reviews, you've got your stakeholders present, being your users, customers, managers, etc. And actually just ask them, get feedback on a score from 1 to 10. How happy, how satisfied are you with our collaboration, the value creation, the delivery time, quality, etc., etc. Just ask them and see if that is improving over time. You can see the impact that you're having as a Scrum Master by also asking these stakeholders. So these are the metrics that I want to leave you with. Good thing we've now heard 15 metrics. What do we do with that? What's the next step? So I asked in the beginning, who's a Scrum Master? If you are, just, use this talk, use these slides, use these ideas as a way of self-reflecting, about your role, about the impact that you want to have. What do you want to achieve with Scrum? Why are you a Scrum Master? What do you want to achieve with this? What does your organization want to achieve with Scrum? Sometimes it's not the same thing, unfortunately, but just make sure that you're aware of this. How do you want your team to be different in X amount of time, in so and so many sprints, in so many months, a year maybe, I don't know, depending on you, depending on your team, on your organization. And define where can you actually add most value to the team. Sometimes it is in the facilitation aspect. Sometimes it is in the servant leader aspect. Sometimes it is by changing the organization, the organizational structure and impediments. And make sure that you're aware of how you would define yourself as a good Scrum Master. Like, what do you want to achieve for yourself? And make sure to discuss this with other people in order to get some feedback on it. Last but not least, make sure to figure out good metrics. Because the one thing, and this is what I'm finding most of the time, is Scrum Masters work a lot on gut feeling, which is great. Gut feeling is super important. I hitchhike a lot, so gut feeling is really important. There's no metrics to help me with that. However, gut feeling for an organizational context, for a business context, is not always the best thing, or like the only thing that you should have. Also think about what good metrics would support your cause and your reflection. How would you measure your progress? How would you measure your team's progress? And how would they pay into the overarching organizational goal? I think I've said most of this already. Generally, what I'm trying to say with this talk also is use these metrics as grounds for conversation. The one thing is to have your gut feeling. The other is to have real figures, to have real metrics, and then to talk about them. Use them to talk to your team, to your management, to the stakeholders. Use them to show the organization, again, change agent role, to show the organization, hey, actually, if we would turn this lever or change this a bit, turn this screw, then we could really make an impact here, especially with the cost of delay. That helps a lot. And this one I really notice in reality, is a lot of the time, your job description doesn't actually say what you believe the Scrum Master role should be about. So make sure that these are in accordance. How many of you have used your achievements as a Scrum Master in order to discuss a pay rise, a potential one? Of the Scrum Masters who raised their hand in the beginning, how many of you have used metrics, velocity, etc., to actually get a pay rise? Okay, I can see one hand, two hands. Did it work? Yes, good. All right, do's and don'ts, because as I said in the beginning, KPIs and metrics are very much frowned upon. Do's and don'ts. Do's, make sure the chosen metrics are sustainable. Yes, quick wins are nice, but they're not sustainable. Secondly, make sure to use a variety of metrics. It's nice to measure velocity, but if you're leaving out all the other stuff, you're going to only focus on that, and it's not a holistic concept. So make sure to use various metrics. Play around with them, experiment with them, try something for 3 sprints, then change it around. Thirdly, and this is something I've gotten some critique for in the past, think about what you want to tell your team. I'm very much for the ask your team, involve your team knows best. I'm very much for that. However, we as human beings, if we know we're being measured, we're going to try to beat that measurement. That's just how we work. So if I know that, my Scrum Master, if I'm a team member and my Scrum Master is being, is really looking out for story points, and whether that is being, that's decreasing, or amount of story points that we can achieve in a sprint is increasing, then maybe I'm going to change my estimations a little bit, okay? So think about whether you want to share it with your team. Maybe, again, experiment with that. And think about whether you want to just observe certain metrics and then share them with your team and then discuss openly, okay, what does that mean? What could that mean? What are the reasons? What are potential solutions for this? Is this even a problem? Or is this a great thing? So depending on your team, depending on the stage you're in, think about whether you want to share this. And always measure in relation to the past. So do not compare teams. Do not compare yourself to other Scrum Masters. Make sure your management doesn't compare you with other Scrum Masters. That makes absolutely no sense. And the last thing, continuously change the metrics. You want to trick the system, not the system trick you. What should you watch out for when working with metrics? So what are the don'ts? Make sure it's the same thing as before. Don't use the same metrics too often. Okay, I can't really stress enough on this. Make sure that you trick the system, so make sure that the team can't trick the system. So make sure to actually change the metrics, firstly for tricking the system, and secondly also your team evolves. Your team changes, impediments change, the markets change, everything changes, so should your metrics. Always look behind and understand the numbers. So don't just take I don't know, your story points, or take your whatever tally you took. Just look what that means. Just don't take it and say, oh, well, this shows that we've got this problem, or this shows that I've improved this, or this shows that whatever. Look behind what it means. Go and talk to your team. Use it in the next sprint retrospective. Make an extra meeting for it. However you do it, talk about it, discuss it, get people involved. Do not abuse the data you're collecting, especially in Europe. That's a very, there's certain laws about this. So make sure, especially when it comes to things like overtime, etc., it should be anonymous, but it should be, for the team. And do not abuse the data. It's really ethically wrong and legally wrong. Don't compare teams and Scrum Masters. I've said this already. And don't annoy your team. So if you're starting with 10 flip charts to try out certain, or to measure certain metrics, it's gonna piss everyone off, and it's gonna get stopped within the first sprint probably. So just, gamify a bit, see what works and what it doesn't. I'm gonna finish this talk with a call to action for you guys, for you Scrum Masters. Firstly, I would really advise you to think about how you want to measure yourself. How do you want to measure your own impact that you're having? How would you like to measure, or how would you like to notice your improvement? Secondly, just start. It doesn't hurt. Just try it out. Start measuring whatever you feel is necessary to be measured right now. Gather data, analyze it, and then take it, as I said, not to your room and think about it yourself, but actually start talking to people about it. Start talking to your team. What does it mean? What can we read from it? What improvements should we go on about? Talk to your team, talk to your management, and maybe you've got other stakeholders that are important to you, like other Scrum Masters in the organization, Agile coaches, etc., etc. And then go back to step 1. If you're not a Scrum Master, and a lot of you aren't, go and talk to your Scrum Master about this. Maybe you can find some way of starting this, experimenting with it. We're working in complex environments. Complex environments are all about experiments and good practices and trying out. So this is one thing that you could try out. I'd love to talk to you about it in the next break. I think there's a break coming up now. Can't wait for your questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, that was a lot of information, and we have a lot of great questions coming up. First off, do you consider Scrum Master a full-time role, or is alternating the Scrum Master hat between eager developers a better solution, as they are more involved in both sides?
Generally, I would say yes, definitely a full-time role, but this is something you can measure. Try it out. Try out having a full-time Scrum Master who does nothing else but Scrum Mastering and improving the team's performance, team's productivity, and then try out, passing the hat around. See how both works. It depends on the team, depends on the organization, depends on the field and market. Yeah. Okay,
great, okay. And why do we want to measure a Scrum Master in the first place? What is the problem you're trying to solve with this proposal?
Thank you for this question. I thought that I made it clear in the beginning. I didn't, so thank you very much. What I'm seeing as an Agile coach a lot of the times is that there's Agile transitions happening, and then after, we introduce Scrum, we introduce Kanban, we introduce whatever Agile practices, and let's say a few months down the line, it's like, okay, well, we've tried it, nothing's really changing. There's nothing really being done. We don't feel that we're improving whatever we're trying to improve, because there's always a reason. Let's say we're not improving our time to market, our quality's not going up, our employee happiness is not going up, customer happiness neither. What's going on? And then most of the time I ask, okay, well, where are your Scrum Masters? Do you have Scrum Masters? Yes, we do. And where are their impediment backlogs? How are they improving the teams? Are you measuring that? Are you looking at that? Who's talking to the Scrum Masters? And most of the time, they don't have an answer. So the impact of the Scrum Master is not being used the way it should be used from what the Scrum Guide originally thought of it, to have this one role that is actually there for improving team performance, team productivity.
Okay, I see. Okay, so in your consulting, this is obvious.
And it's something I see in every company.
Yeah.
Every single one that calls me up has that one issue.
It's
There's lots of other
underutilized.
issues, but that is one of the solutions is, to have an agile transformation, and it's not working out for a reason.
Okay, that's very clarifying. Okay. So, yeah, we already did that one. There is no doubt that Scrum Master is important during agile transitions, but is a Scrum Master really needed for a performing team?
No.
Okay, so yeah, you got that right.
But I've never seen a high-performing team. I mean, I don't know if this is a performing team or a high-performing team. I've never seen a high-performing team in a business context. I don't know how many of you have seen how many of you have seen a high-performing team in a business context? Be honest. Okay, there are a few raises of hands, which is good. I'm glad. If it's a high-performing team, have a look whether it's necessary. Scrum Mastering is all about stabilizing performance or productivity and increasing it. If you can increase the performance of a high-performance team, great. If you don't want it, then don't bother. Don't get a Scrum Master. That's fine. If it makes sense, get one. If it doesn't. Don't.
Very straightforward, very straightforward. How do you measure how other stakeholders, not the team, are satisfied with the Scrum Master?
Conversation is one of the options. Another is to put up a flip chart after a sprint review, for example. A sprint review is typically where you get stakeholders involved. Get a flip chart up and ask for the satisfaction on a scale from 1 to 10. Maybe also with free space for a comment. That's probably the easiest way to do.
Okay. And after a couple months or years, the squad can reach a point when they are very well organized and self-managed. And what's the real value of a Scrum Master at that point? Similar to what we just covered, but
I think I've
we've spoken to
clarified
that.
It depends. If it's a great Scrum Master, and I've seen a few great Scrum Masters, they can still help the team to reflect on how to improve, even if they're already a great team. Just like what's it called in English? Like every now and again, just to come in and do a bit of coaching, a bit of reflection. Mm-hmm.
I don't know the word. I'm feeling like a bad English speaker, but thank you so much. That's all the time we have. So much information. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much.
And for everyone whose questions didn't get answered, please find Stephanie. She's here in the evening.
And tomorrow.
And tomorrow.
Thank you.